Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another fantastic episode of Crimes Against Humanity on Curry's Front Porch. Yeah, today we're going to see how much traffic we can destroy. Just kidding. It's gotten a little windier than it was just a minute ago, so please forgive me. If I have to, I'm going to put my hand down on the laptop so that it doesn't blow away like a sailboat. So, what are we doing today? I want to remind you that it's important to remember a crime against humanity has to meet one of those 11 requirements: murder, slavery, torture, discrimination against people based on ethnicity, culture, gender, politics, etc. And it has to be done in a widespread fashion. Like, it has to be either a whole bunch of places at a relatively same period of time, the same place over a long period of time, or to a large number of people. That's pretty much the three definitions of widespread. It has to be against a civilian population. Like, it can't be in wartime, soldier versus soldier. And it has to be, if not widespread, then part of a systematic attack. Like an organization or the government or a leader has to have a plan that includes doing these horrible things to people. And the last important part, the one that we didn't get to till the very end of the video last time, is that it needs to be done with the leader's knowledge. And if the leader didn't know in advance, then the leader had to either have congratulated people for doing these crimes against humanity, or not punish them at all, made it look like that was okay to do in the future. So, okay, you've got those 11 things. Okay, everybody, sorry. Anyway, you got those 11 things on the list, and they have to meet those requirements. They have to be done with the leader's knowledge, they have to be part of a widespread event, or systematic, planned out, and it has to be against civilians. I want to go through documents A, B, and C today so that you can know what we're talking about. These are not the primary documents, A, B, and C. So, we're going to read A, B, and C together. And you're going to get information out of them. And I think I might move inside for this. This is starting to get unreasonable. So bear with me. Come with me. Yeah. It's like some bad YouTube video. I hear you. What do you mean, like? Okay. So, turn the television off. Okay. Hey, recognize this? Yeah? Okay. So, we're going to take a look at document A now. This is the teacher background material introduction document. What do I want you to do with these documents? Well, for now, what I want you to do is keep track of anything in these documents that you think prove Columbus's innocence or guilt, or would help to indicate to somebody whether he was guilty or innocent of crimes against humanity. How do you keep track? Well, there's a document that was linked in the lesson from last time where it's a chart. It's basically a graph, right? Not a chart, a graph, I'm sorry. So in this graph, what you do is you put which document, A, B, C, D, E, F. You put what the actual quote is, and you put whether you think it goes towards innocence or guilt and how. Explain your logical reasoning. So keep track of A, B, and C using these, and that'll be due Thursday if you're a Maroon Day kid, Friday if you're not. Ready? Here we go. On October 12, 1492, Columbus first landed on the island that he named Hispaniola, today shared by Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Columbus mistakenly believed he had accomplished his primary goal of finding a short transatlantic route to Asia. For years, European sailors had longed to find a shortcut to replace the overland trading routes to East Asia. Many sailors at the time, including Columbus, may have heard the Icelandic sagas describing Leif Erikson's voyages to Newfoundland 500 years earlier. Portuguese sailors had already begun to expand Europe's knowledge of the eastern Atlantic, and Columbus, like many Europeans, speculated that India and Asia lay across the Atlantic. Thus, it's important to note that while Columbus had pioneered an unprecedented route across the Atlantic, his voyage was just one single chapter in a long saga of European maritime exploration. In the late 15th century, trends in economics and demographics, technology, cartography, that's map making, and religion all converged, leading to a competition, primarily between Spain and Portugal, to expand trade and Christianity. Within this context, Columbus deserves the credit for linking Europe and the Americas, and also deserves to be held accountable for his individual actions and decisions. Yet it's worth noting that had he not attempted his voyage, or if it had failed, another sailor probably would have woken up Europe to the existence of North and South America over time. At the close of the 15th century, now that means 1400s, Europe's geographic knowledge improved dramatically. Contrary to the popular myth, Columbus and most Europeans understood that the world was round. In 1487, the Portuguese sailor Bartholomew Diaz had gone around the southern tip of Africa in search of a way to get to Asia by sea. 10 years later, and 5 years after Columbus's voyage across the Atlantic, Vasco da Gama of Portugal went around the Cape of Africa and traveled as far as India. Despite the scope of these voyages, however, Europeans remained uncertain about the Earth's circumference until 1522, when Magellan, a Portuguese navigator who sailed for Spain, circumnavigated the globe. In 1492, Columbus had underestimated the Earth's circumference by 2/3. So Columbus thought that the world was super tiny compared to what it really was. Instead, it was 2/3 bigger than he thought. If he'd realized that the Earth was as big as it was, he wouldn't have tried to do what he did. Ignorance of the fact that the Earth was as big as it really is, gave him the motivation to do what seemed impossible. Columbus's voyages depended on many other factors. At the end of the 15th century, so late 1400s, Europe had largely recovered the huge population loss that it had gotten during the plague of the 1340s. Massive disease, killed 1/3 to 1/2 of the population, depending on what area you're talking about. So, bouncing back from that was important. Accordingly, many felt the need to expand the European economy into foreign markets, especially Asia. This expansion would not have been possible without the rise of strong, unified monarchies in Europe that could finance these ocean voyages. In Spain, Isabella and Ferdinand got married, uniting the two halves of Spain, Castile and Aragon, into one monarchy. This monarchy came to power at the end of a long war between Christians and Muslims in Europe. Having just kicked out the Jews and Muslims from their country, Ferdinand and Isabella tried to expand their economic power and their religious power. Fortunately for Christopher Columbus, his request for their help and money for his transatlantic voyage came at just the right time. On the eve of Columbus's first voyage, according to recent estimates, as many as 75 million people lived in North and South America. These people, inaccurately named Indians by Columbus, who thought he had gone to Indonesia, descended from the first true discoverers of North and South America, the people who had gone over from Russia back 15,000 years ago when the space between Russia and Alaska was all frozen over in an ice age. Those first explorers who came around. When Columbus arrived in the Caribbean 500 years ago, he met people whose ancestors had come to North and South America at least 12,000 years before him. As nomads chased the big game up and down North and South America, they had come from Asia through a land bridge of ice that had once connected Alaska to Siberia. Over time, these first pioneers spread out and settled North and South America. It's impossible to try to describe the typical Native American at the time that Columbus showed up because of the incredible cultural diversity that there was in this huge area of Alaska all the way down to the southern tip of Chile and Argentina. The lack of written evidence also makes this task more difficult. It especially complicates efforts to understand Native American history before 1492. But nevertheless, archaeological evidence provides us a glimpse of the long history of these peoples. The stereotype of a warrior on horseback roaming the ancient plains and living in perfect harmony with nature can be pretty easily put to bed. That's not what Native Americans were really like. They didn't even have horses until Columbus and other European explorers showed up. Instead, they lived all throughout the Americas. They were many, many different tribes of people. They had adapted to every single different climate that you find, from Alaska all the way down to Chile. Their histories are full of inventions that were produced in total isolation from Asia, from Europe, from Africa. Some used very complex calendars. They lived in cities bigger than any cities in Europe at this time. And no, the pyramids of the ancient Maya or the Inca, they were not built by Europeans secretly, and they were definitely not built by space aliens. Anyway, sorry. It's just kind of racist to think that Native Americans could not have possibly done anything that cool if you gave them 12,000 years to try to do cool stuff. Of course they could. Many lived in small villages and survived by growing corn and hunting game, just like Europeans lived on manors, medieval manors, and did exactly the same thing. Native Americans spoke 2,000 different languages at the time that Columbus showed up, and their political structures, government structures, their social structures, and economic structures were very, very different from each other because they lived in such different environments up and down North and South America. With the arrival of white men in 1492, radical changes shook Native American communities. For many, disease marked their first encounter with Europeans. Before 1492, Native Americans had never acquired, nor had they needed, immunity to diseases that Europeans had, like smallpox. Coastal societies got diseases that spread inland from the seaboard through regular contact with other Native Americans who had contacted the Europeans who showed up. In some areas, 90% of the Native American population died out, largely because of disease, without ever actually seeing a European. Like, it wasn't that the Europeans showed up and murdered everybody all the time. It could have been that another Native American got a disease from a European and then spread it to a whole bunch of other Native Americans who never met a European. As time passed, however, it became apparent that racism and greed posed an equal enemy to Native Americans. Columbus's first voyage was a relatively small undertaking. After 10 weeks of sailing around the Caribbean islands, he went home. He took a handful of products from North and South America and 6 kidnapped natives. His apparent success, however, brought him financial support for 3 extra voyages later in his life. His second voyage brought 17 ships with it, carrying over 1,200 Spaniards. It allowed for an extended period of time, a long stay in the Caribbean. Not finding the abundant and readily accessible deposits of gold that he hoped he could find, yet determined to make a profit out of finding North and South America, Columbus against the Queen of Spain's desires, enslaved 1,600 natives, and brought a third of them back to Spain. Herein lies the ominous beginning of the Atlantic slave trade. Subsequent settlers in the New World would reverse the dominant flow of trade by bringing Africans to the Americas rather than taking Native Americans back to Europe. In the end, Europeans enslaved about 11 million Africans over a period of 4 centuries for use in the Americas. During his lifetime, Columbus's discoveries seemed relatively insignificant compared to the Portuguese explorers sailing up and down Africa and India. Columbus died in poverty in 1506, disgraced by the Spanish government for insubordination, not following orders. To this day, to the day of his death, he believed that he had discovered a way to get all the way to Asia by sailing across the Atlantic. In retrospect, however, his encounter is far more important than that. True, he didn't pioneer the Great Waterway to Asia or China or Indonesia. True, but instead he brought to an end the isolation of the two halves of the world, and he ushered in an era of global interdependence in which we live today. After 1492, disease, flowers, animals, masses of people with diverse cultures flowed between the two previously separate and unknown regions of the globe. So, that was document A. If there's stuff there that you thought was an indication that Columbus did not commit crimes against humanity, if you saw a lack of crimes against humanity in there, then you want to know where in particular you felt that. If you feel Columbus did commit crimes against humanity by document A, note that. Just a reminder for you, though, document A is not as important as the documents that were actually written by people in Columbus's lifetime. So, the next thing we're going to take a look at is the next thing in the packet, which is document C. Oh, no, sorry. We're going to take a look at this map. This map, which is document B. Now, in document B, this is important if you want to try to prove that Columbus was in a particular place at a particular time. Remember that a crime against humanity has to be committed with the leader's knowledge and based on their order. Or not, if they don't order it, you have to at least know that they knew it happened and never punished people for it afterwards or something. But it really helps if you want to try to prove that Columbus is guilty. It really helps to say he was there. If Columbus was somewhere else and not literally commanding the Spanish in the Caribbean, then it's much harder to try to say he's guilty of something that Spaniards did when he wasn't even there. So, Columbus's voyages. The first voyage. Is marked Columbus's first. It's the thick one, and it comes right here. He sails around a little bit, and then he goes home. Columbus's voyage was from 1492 to 1493. It was just to explore. He landed in the Caribbean, and he left 40 men at a place that he named Navidad. Okay. His second voyage, Columbus's second voyage, comes in from further south. Columbus's second voyage comes in, goes around, goes here, and then goes out home again. In Columbus's second voyage, it was an effort to build colonies. He noticed that Navidad was totally gone, and he established a new Spanish fortress called La Isabela, and he left a colony behind so that he could go and explore more places in the Caribbean. So he brought more Spanish soldiers, set them up, and then sailed to explore some more. Columbus's third voyage was half to explore and half to bring supplies to the colonists that he'd left behind, and to make sure that they hadn't been killed like the people at La Navidad. There was a revolt against Columbus during this time by his own Spanish settlers. they didn't like the way that he was enforcing the laws of the King and Queen of Spain on them. And so they actually rebelled against him, imprisoned him, and sent him back to Spain as a prisoner, saying that he was bad for the Spanish settlers. So the third voyage, Columbus's third voyage, comes in from much further south, along the coastline of South America, goes up, he visits the colonists, brings them supplies, and then gets captured. So it's not really a voyage home, because he was in chains on a prison ship going home. And Columbus's fourth voyage, oh, by the way, that was 1498 to 1500. Columbus's last voyage to the New World was in 1502 to 1504. And I hear you thinking to yourself, but Mr. Curry, he got brought back to Spain as a prisoner. Well, he didn't stay a prisoner, because he successfully pleaded that he was innocent of the horrible charges against him, and that it was the Spanish colonists and some of the rebels who were actually the ones doing things wrong and not following the King and Queen of Spain's orders. So not only did they release him, but they gave him another fleet and let him sail back and explore more. So 1502 to 1504, Columbus's last voyage to the New World, he was not allowed to enter Santo Domingo because of a bad hurricane warning. If he had tried to sail in the hurricane, it would have just wrecked the ships in the harbor. He explored Central America, he went to Panama, he was marooned in Jamaica for a long time. So Columbus's fourth voyage comes in a little further south than the last one. He sails down and around to explore the coastline of South America. He goes to Jamaica and goes there for a while, and then goes home again. So those are Columbus's voyages. Again, that document is really important if you want to try to prove when and where Columbus was. The next document that I'm giving you here is document C, the timeline. Now again, any of these documents, A, B, and C, are not as strong in the trial of Columbus because they're modern day people recreating or thinking about Columbus's original actions. The other documents that Columbus himself wrote, they're eyewitness documents, they're prime documents. And so these are the things that are going to be stronger in court when you're trying to prove Columbus guilty, or when you're trying to say there's not enough proof and he should be released. So, timeline. Let's cover this. Now, one thing you're going to notice about the timeline, it is very biased. So, I'm curious if you can see how it's biased. Approximately 13,000 BC, the first known human beings live in the Caribbean. Approximately 800 BC, now we're talking 2,200 years before Columbus. How relevant is this? The people who call themselves Taino, or men of good, arrive in the region. With great care for the earth, the Tainos are able to feed millions of people. No one in the community goes hungry. They play sports. They recite poetry. They are great inventors and travel from island to island. One Spanish priest, later, reported that he never saw two Tainos fighting. There are frequent skirmishes between the Tainos and the Caribs on nearby islands, but these threaten neither civilization. So the author clearly wants you to think what about these original Native Americans, the Tainos? That they are so wonderful and peaceful. They never do anything wrong. They're perfect people. Occasionally they might get into a fist fight with somebody who comes to invade them, but there's nothing wrong with them. They're lovely people. Innocent, blameless, perfect. 1451. Columbus is born, probably in Genoa. At the time of his birth, there are as many as 70 to 100 million people living in what will today be called the Americas. They are of many nationalities, speaking maybe 2,000 different languages. Okay, so they're saying Columbus is born, and they're saying at that time there's 100 million Native Americans. So are they trying to tell you this man is the mass murderer of all these people? Like, the author's trying to set you up with one person is born, and he will be the destruction of all these people. Kind of dramatic. 1453. Constantinople, now the city of Istanbul, falls to the Ottoman Turks, who make it the capital of their empire. For European merchants, trade with Asia becomes more difficult. What does this have to do with anything? Well, the whole reason Columbus sails in the opposite direction from Constantinople is so that he can get trade with Asia. And the reason he needs to do that is because trade with Asia is harder, because the Muslim Ottomans make it harder for Europeans to get stuff from Asia. 1455. Castile in Spain starts attacking Granada in Andalusia in Spain, the last part of Spain under Muslim rule. The Arabs, who were called Moors by the European Christians, had ruled the Iberian Peninsula for 8 centuries. 1471. Around this time, Columbus first sails on a Genoese ship. 1483. Under King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, the Inquisition intensifies as in the Christian reconquered areas of Spain. The Inquisition aims at rooting out Muslims and Jews who had converted to Christianity, but whose conversion the Inquisition thinks isn't sincere. Before it's over, 3 centuries later, thousands will be killed, with an estimated 3 million people kicked out of Spain. 1484. Columbus first presents his idea to the King of Portugal for reaching the Indies, Indonesia and China, the Philippines, by sailing west instead of east. The plan is rejected, not because the king's advisors don't think the world is round, they know it is, but instead because they think Columbus's estimate of the distance around the globe is optimistically too small. 1486, Columbus proposes a western voyage to Isabella of Spain, whose advisors say, don't make a decision yet. Let's think about it. 1488, Columbus appeals again to the King of Portugal. At the same time, Bartholomew Diaz, a Portuguese explorer, sails around Africa to try to get to the Indies. This eliminates Portugal's interest in going the opposite direction, since they know they can do it around Africa. 1490, Queen Isabella's advisors tell her, reject Columbus's proposal, it's not worth it. But Isabella does decide to keep him on the payroll as an employee of the King and Queen of Spain, offering him hope that someday he might make his trip. January 2nd, 1492, the Arab rulers and their assistants, their royal court, surrender in Granada, Spain. According to the surrender agreement, the inhabitants of Muslim Spain have until the start of 1495 to decide whether to live in Andalusia and Granada as Christians or pick up their stuff and leave. Those who choose to stay feel the great threat of the Inquisition immediately because the Spanish won't trust their conversion to Christianity in order to stay. In 1498, official inquisitors show up, and they force people to convert to Christianity. March 30th, 1492. Ferdinand and Isabella order all the Jews to leave Spain. April 1492. Ferdinand and Isabella agree to give Columbus what he wants to sail west. They also agree that he will get 10% of all the wealth that is brought back to Spain from North and South America, that he will get the title Admiral of the Ocean Sea and Governor and Viceroy. Roy means king, roi, R-O-I in French. So Viceroy means like assistant king for the regions that he discovers. All these titles will be inherited by his heirs, his sons. August 2nd, 1492. This is the deadline for the Jews to leave Spain. Between 120,000 and 150,000 are forced out, able to take only what they can carry. They must leave all of their gold and silver and jewels and money for the King and Queen of Spain. Why mention this stuff when this is a document about Columbus? Well, I think the author is trying to tie Columbus in with the crimes, maybe against humanity, if you think they're crimes against humanity, that Ferdinand and Isabella are doing to people who aren't Christian. August 3rd, 1492. Columbus leaves the port of Palos instead of the port of Cadiz. I know it's spelled Cadiz, but Spanish pronounce it Cadiz. So he sails out of that port, out of Palos. He can't do Cadiz because Cadiz is full of ships that are taking 8,000 Jews out of Spain. October 12th, Juan Rodriguez Bernejo, a sailor on the Pinta, one of the three ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. This sailor shouts, "Land! Land!" Columbus later claims that he was the first person to spot land and collects the lifetime pension that was promised. The ships arrive at the island of Guanahani, which Columbus claims for Ferdinand and Isabella. Columbus receives presents from the local people that he encounters and gives them red caps, beads, and other things of little value. The first thing that he tries to ask the people is there any gold? Do you have gold? Is there any gold anywhere around here? October 14th. Columbus's thoughts turn to slavery. When your highnesses so command, these Native Americans can be carried off to Castile or held captive on this island, since with 50 men they could all be kept in subjection and forced to do whatever you wished. So the person writing this article is trying to say Columbus is an evil man, and he's already thinking of enslaving all these Native Americans. Really, what he's writing back to the King and Queen of Spain is, hey, you give me orders. I'll do what you want me to do. These people seem nice. If you want to make them into your subjects, then we can do that. These people can be your citizens. November 12th. Columbus kidnaps 10 Tainos. My men brought 7 head of women, small and large, and 3 children onto the boat. November 17th. 2 of the captives run away. December 9th. Columbus sails into a harbor that the island of the Taino people call Haiti. Haiti. Oh, hey. Its plains, its land, is the loveliest place in the world, he says, and it reminds Columbus of Spain. He calls this land Española. October, November, and December 1492, Columbus's every move is determined by where he can find gold. On December 23rd, he writes in his journal, "Our Lord in his goodness, please guide me so that I can find gold. I mean their gold mine, for I have many people here who say they know of a gold mine that exists." Still, by mid-December, Columbus has found very little gold. Quick question for you. Is searching for gold a crime against humanity? Don't think so. December 25th, Christmas Day. Columbus's ship, the Santa Maria, hits rocks off Española. He's forced to abandon the ship. And the leader of the Native Americans nearby, the Taino leader, Guacanagari, weeps when he hears that Columbus has had a disaster, a shipwreck. Tainos help the Spanish unload the ship without the loss of a single shoestring. And Columbus says, "These people are a people so full of love and without greed, I believe there might be no better race or better land in the world than this." So he's impressed. December 26th. Realizing that he's going to have to leave men behind because he only has 2 ships to sail home, Columbus orders a fortress and a tower built for his men. He writes, it's necessary to make the Indians realize that they must serve the King and Queen of Spain, with love and fear. January 2nd, 1493, Columbus prepares to leave Haiti. He leaves behind 39 men, and orders them to discover a gold mine somewhere, anywhere. So those are his orders. Guys, you stay behind. Make sure these people know that the King and Queen of Spain owns the land now, and find a gold mine. Crime against humanity there? You be the judge. January 13th. First reported skirmish between Spaniards and Indians. After landing on an island to trade for bows and arrows, Columbus writes that many of the Indians prepared to assault his men and capture them. So the Spaniards attacked them. They gave the Indians a great slash on the buttocks and wounded another one in the breast with an arrow. So they had a little skirmish. One guy got stabbed in the butt with a Spanish sword, and another one got hit in the chest with an arrow, but probably didn't die. Columbus believes that these people were Carib, not Taino, and that they eat men, that they are cannibals. He regrets that he didn't capture some of them and bring them back to Spain. February 15th, Columbus returns with relatively little of any value. In a letter written aboard the ship, Columbus lies, saying that on the island of Hispaniola there are many spices and many great mines of gold and other metals. So this video has kind of hit a time limit now. I'm going to stop it, load it, start another video maybe, and we will get the rest of this document knocked out for you. The homework for next time is that you watch these videos, that you read these documents right along with my commentary maybe, and pick out quotes that you think support his innocence or quotes that support his guilt. Part 2 will come. See ya.